There's a peculiar instant nestled between sleep and waking, a fleeting pause when the world feels suspended, soft, unreal, untouched by the weight of actual life. I used to cherish that moment. It felt like a gentle exhale before the day began. But not anymore. Now it's the part one dread the most. Because in that sliver of time, just before awareness crashes in, I forget. I forget the truth of my situation. I forget why I wake up in unfamiliar places, in beds that aren't mine, going by names I never chose. And then, like a tidal wave, it all floods back. Her voice echoes in my mind. Her laughter lingers. The way she looked at me just before I left for good. The way I could see in her eyes that she truly never believed I would go. But I didn't just leave my wife. I disappeared. Completely. No farewell. No explanation. One day I was there, and the next, I was gone without a trace. For years, she had no idea where I had gone, no clue if I was even alive. And then, one day, she found me. But before I can tell you how she tracked me down, I need to go back to the night when my entire life began to unravel. Before I vanished. Before she stood silently in front of me after all those years. There was a night that set everything in motion. It began like so many others. I came home late, bone-tired, carrying a bag of groceries. The house felt strangely quiet, too quiet. That silence pressed on me as I walked into the bedroom. She was sitting there on the edge of the bed, posture straight, hands placed gently in her lap. Something about how she sat made my stomach twist. As if she had practiced this moment over and over. "Hey," I said while setting down the bags. "Is everything all right?" She lifted her gaze to meet mine, and in that second, I understood. I couldn't explain how, I just knew. Her eyes held a distant calm I had never seen before. It was a quiet detachment, as if she had already come to terms with whatever she was about to reveal. Then she spoke words that split my world in two. I wish I could say I responded with grace. That I stayed calm, took a deep breath, and asked questions that made sense. But I didn't. I laughed. Not because anything was amusing, but because my brain simply refused to absorb what she was saying. I honestly believed she was joking until she continued speaking. And slowly, my laughter died out. That was the moment my former life ended. The second everything I believed to be true fell apart. The point from which there was no return. I stood there, my heartbeat loud in my ears, struggling to make sense of what she had just confessed. My mind wouldn't accept it. As if some internal defense mechanism had thrown up a barrier to shield me from the reality closing in. But denial didn't change a thing. The truth remained. She wasn't the person I thought she was. I had always prided myself on being rational, the kind of man who assessed every possibility before acting. But at that moment, all logic deserted me. I was all emotion, raw, unfiltered, overwhelmed by betrayal. She remained still, waiting. I could read her expression. She expected me to shout, to demand answers, maybe even to argue or plead with her. Perhaps she thought I'd fight to hold on to us. But I did none of those things. Instead, I turned and walked out. Her voice followed me, sharp with disbelief. "Where are you going?" I didn't answer. I grabbed my coat, picked up my keys, and walked straight out the door. I wasn't thinking about a destination. I wasn't thinking at all. My body moved on its own, leading me away from the house we shared, away from the life I had thought was real. I drove for hours. Through the city, past the suburbs, down long stretches of highway where no one knew me. Just another pair of headlights vanishing into the darkness. Eventually, I pulled off at a rest stop and sat there, hands clenching the steering wheel as if letting go would make everything collapse. That's when it struck me she never believed I would actually leave. Her calm demeanor, her careful words, it all made sense now. She had pictured this playing out differently. She thought we'd argue. Maybe I'd stay with a friend for a few nights, then return, ready to fix what was broken. But she didn't really know me. I opened the glove box, took out my wallet, and stared at my ID. My name. My address. All the links to the life I no longer wanted. And in that moment, I chose. I wasn't going back. Life can shift dramatically in just one night. One moment you believe you're on solid ground, and the next, you're standing at the edge of a vast unknown, staring into uncertainty. By the time morning arrived, I had crafted a plan, extreme, irreversible, but somehow the only thing that felt right. I ditched my phone, shut down my accounts, and walked into a small roadside diner in a town 3 states away. I paid in cash, using a name that wasn't mine. That was the first time I had ever done that. And from that moment on, I became a ghost. I didn't leave a note. I never said goodbye. I slipped away without a word, to her or anyone else. As far as she was concerned, I had simply vanished, disappeared without a trace. And for many years, that's exactly what it looked like. She never found me, until one unexpected night, everything changed. The first several weeks after I left were a haze, but not the kind people associate with wild nights or bursts of adrenaline. This was the kind of mental fog that comes from deep emotional wounds, where reality drifts further away and nothing feels entirely real. I had imagined that freedom would come with a sense of triumph, something sweet and liberating. Instead, it felt empty. I had no direction, just a man wandering from one town to the next, moving between dim gas stations and rundown motels, going through the motions of life without really living it. In those early days, she stayed in my thoughts constantly, but not in a nostalgic, lovesick kind of way. It was more like trying to make sense of the damage she had left behind. I needed to understand the reasons, why she had done what she did, why she thought she could hide it, and why she assumed I would accept it. But those questions echoed into silence. No explanation could ever satisfy the storm inside me. So I let her go, or at least, I told myself I had. Eventually, I built a quiet, unassuming life in a small town far removed from where my old one had ended. Nobody there knew my name, my story, or my scars. I got a simple job, something that didn't ask questions, paid in cash, rented a modest place. Slowly, I stopped checking over my shoulder. I convinced myself she wasn't looking for me anymore. I even started to believe that I had made it out, that I had finally won. But the truth about running away is that you can never really escape your own shadow. The past finds ways to slip back in, creeping in through the cracks during quiet nights, whispering when the world goes still. It wasn't that I wanted to be with her again. I didn't long for our old life. But there were nights when I'd wake up in confusion, heart pounding, expecting to hear her breathing beside me. Sometimes, my hand would reach for my phone on instinct, ready to send a silly message or recall an inside joke from better times, only to remember that the person I once loved no longer existed. Still, I kept going. Slowly, I carved out something like peace. There were even moments of genuine happiness, the kind that sneaks up on you. A smile exchanged with the elderly man at the corner store, a knowing nod from the barista who already knew what I'd order, brief connections with strangers who saw only who I was now. And then, everything shifted. That night, I was alone in a diner, quietly sipping coffee and absent-mindedly flipping through a newspaper like someone clinging to the past. The place was nearly empty, just a handful of people absorbed in their own quiet routines. The bell above the door chimed, and out of habit, I looked up. That's when I saw her. She hadn't noticed me yet. Her eyes swept across the room, as if searching for something, maybe someone. Her face had changed over the years. There was a tiredness in her features, a quiet weight that hadn't been there before. But it was definitely her. The woman who had shattered my world. The same one who sat on the edge of our bed years ago and dismantled our life with a few carefully chosen words. I stayed still, barely even breathed, just watched. Then, as if she could feel my eyes on her, she turned. Our gazes locked, and she froze. For the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely speechless, completely caught off guard. She had tracked me down, but she clearly wasn't prepared for this moment. For what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. The background sounds of the diner faded, the soft clinking of dishes, faint chatter, the distant sizzle from the kitchen. All of it seemed far away, like I was submerged underwater. The only thing that felt real was the space between us, thick with everything we had never said. She looked older, not just in appearance, but in spirit. There was something heavy in her eyes, a quiet fatigue that spoke of long years spent searching. Maybe she had given up hope. Maybe she had stumbled in here purely by chance. But now she stood just feet away from me. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup, and for the first time in years, I felt a stir of emotion that wasn't anger or sadness. It was curiosity. What had brought her here? She stepped closer, hesitating as she approached my table. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the strap of her purse. I didn't say a word. I waited. I could see her wrestling with what to say, scanning my face like she was trying to recognize the man I used to be. James, she whispered, barely audible. James. Hearing my name come from her lips after all these years was surreal. I'd been living under an alias for so long. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be called that. I didn't answer, just leaned back, watching her, letting the silence linger. She swallowed hard, her voice strained. I I thought you were dead. The urge to laugh was almost too much. Dead? I had often wondered what she believed had happened to me. Maybe she thought I had been in a car crash. Maybe she believed I had gone completely mad. Yet not once did it cross my mind that she might have truly thought I was dead. I tilted my head slightly and asked, "Now that you know I'm alive, what does that mean for you?" Her breath caught in her throat. I watched her hands twist the strap of her purse nervously, her eyes darting anywhere but toward mine. Guilt was written all over her face. I could tell she wanted to say something, to explain, to justify, to somehow rewrite the past in a way that would ease her conscience. Her voice trembled as she finally admitted, I tried to find you. For years. She spoke quietly, like she didn't want the truth to echo too loudly. I hired investigators. I exhausted every option I had. Hearing that tightened something inside me. I had always assumed she would have moved on quickly, that my vanishing act would have been a brief pause before she returned to her regular life without me. But if she really did search for me all those years, then why? I studied her carefully, watching for the truth she couldn't bring herself to say. Then, it dawned on me. She hadn't been looking for me because she missed me. It wasn't about love or loss. It was about need. That realization drew a cold, bitter smile to my face. Why don't we just skip to the part where you tell me what you're after? Her eyes snapped up, and in that instant, I saw everything. Shame, guilt, and something even deeper, something that said she knew she had been caught. Her breath shook as she exhaled, and for the first time, the truth seemed to settle over her like a heavy coat. She wasn't seeking forgiveness or closure. She was here because she had nowhere else to turn. I let my words linger in the air. Her face morphed through surprise, hesitation, and finally into something like surrender. She hadn't expected me to cut through her carefully planned act. No, she had probably rehearsed this meeting, imagining a gentle, emotional reunion, a second chance at redemption. But I was no longer the man she had walked away from. She lowered herself into the chair across from me with slow, uncertain movements, her hands folded in her lap like a scolded child. I stayed quiet, letting her sit in the discomfort of my silence. "I don't even know where to begin," she mumbled at last. I raised an eyebrow. "Start with the truth." She flinched, a subtle yet revealing response. For years, I had wondered if she ever regretted what she did, if the memory of her choices haunted her at night. But now, looking at her, it was clear. Regret wasn't what brought her back. She needed something. "I never stopped searching," she whispered. "After you left, after you just disappeared, I didn't know how to function. I didn't know how to explain anything to anyone." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "And who's responsible for that?" Her lips parted, but no words came. No justifications. No fabrications. That was a small mercy. She drew in a shaky breath. "I deserve that. I know I did. But James," her voice cracked, "I came here because I need your help." And there it was. The admission she had been working her way toward. The words she feared would expose her. I leaned back, arms folded, and waited. Her eyes dropped to her lap as she twisted her fingers nervously. "Everything fell apart after you were gone. The person I was involved with, it didn't last. Not that you're surprised." She let out a soft laugh, but it held no amusement. I said nothing. She would get no comfort from me. "I lost everything," she continued. "The house, my savings, my reputation." That last word made my eyebrow twitch slightly. Reputation? That was an interesting detail. She paused again, as though unsure of how much to reveal. "I didn't realize how much I leaned on you until you were gone." I let out a low, bitter chuckle. "What you mean is, you didn't realize how much you relied on my income, my consistency, and my willingness to fix your disasters." Her expression crumbled, and for a fleeting moment, pity stirred in me. But I forced it down. "I made terrible decisions," she admitted. "And I know I have no right to ask you for anything. But I'm out of options." I watched her closely, letting her words settle into the space between us. Somewhere along the line, desperation had driven her to track me down after all these years. "You want something?" I said, my voice calm. "So tell me, what is it?" Her hands balled into fists, her breath uneven. Then she looked at me with a rawness I couldn't quite define. "I need help," she said softly. "I need you to come back." The silence that followed was thick and unrelenting. Then, unexpectedly, I laughed. A real laugh. It rang through the room, sharp and cold, cutting through the moment like a knife. She had searched for me all those years, not because of love or sorrow, but because she believed I was still the same person she once left behind. The one who would drop everything for her. The one who would always put her first. But she was mistaken. Terribly mistaken. I leaned back in my chair, letting her plea hang in the air like a sour smell. She wanted me to return. But return to what? To the ruins she had created? To the world she had destroyed with her own selfish choices? The thought almost made me laugh again, if it wasn't so incredibly sad. She fidgeted in her seat, clearly waiting for me to respond, but I stayed silent. I wanted to see just how far she'd be willing to go. She nervously ran her tongue over her lips, looking like she expected me to stand up and leave at any moment. James, I know how this must sound. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, she began, her voice shaky. But I have no one else. I've hit the lowest point of my life. Her gaze dropped to the table, hands balling into fists. After you vanished, everything spiraled. I let out a quiet sigh. Oh, really? And whose responsibility is that? She looked up fast, wide-eyed, as if something inside her cracked at my response. She hadn't anticipated this icy version of me. Somewhere deep down, she had hoped the man I once was still existed, someone who would care, someone who might try to fix things. But that man no longer lived within me. I know, she whispered, swallowing hard. I messed everything up. I see that now. Do you really? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Or do you just miss the life you had when I was around? Her breath caught in her throat, and she turned her face away, ashamed. That reaction was all the confirmation I needed. By all accounts, I should have stood up and walked out right then. I could have tossed a few dollars on the table for the coffee and left her behind, drowning in her remorse. But something inside me, dark, bitter, and curious, needed to hear the rest. Go on, I said. What happened after I left? She hesitated, likely debating how much of the truth she could share without completely shattering herself. But in the end, she must have realized there was nothing left to protect. So she began to speak. I waited, she confessed. At first, I thought you just needed time. That you'd come back after cooling off. But then the days dragged into weeks. And then months. And still, nothing. She exhaled a trembling breath. I tried everything. I reached out to your friends, your family. I even contacted the police eventually. I raised a brow. And what did you tell them? I said, my husband had vanished. That I feared something might have happened to you. I chuckled and shook my head. Let me guess, they didn't offer much comfort. Her face turned crimson with embarrassment. No. Everyone knew. What I'd done. Good, I muttered, then let her keep talking, curious about how deep her downfall had gone. The guy I got involved with. It was never real, she admitted, her voice quiet. Deep down, I think I always knew that. He wasn't you. Her words landed with no impact. No vindication. No satisfaction. Just a hollow echo. He left me not long after you did, she went on. Said I had too much emotional baggage. That I wasn't exciting anymore. I scoffed. So you thought you were upgrading, but in the end, you got cast aside. She winced, but didn't argue. I lost it all, she murmured. The house, the comfort, the respect I once had. People whispered about me. Friends stopped answering my calls. It felt like I became a ghost, just like you. She let out a sharp breath. I suppose I had that coming. I didn't bother confirming her statement. It was too obvious. I spent years trying to move forward, she continued, voice strained and raw. But no matter where I went or what I tried, it always circled back to you. She swallowed hard. You didn't just leave, James. You wiped away every trace of yourself. You turned into someone new. And I had to know why. That made me pause. She wasn't wrong. I hadn't merely walked away. I had erased every part of who I was, rebuilding myself in a life where no one knew my name. She had spent years chasing the ghost of the man I used to be. Well, now you've found me, I said flatly. So what do you want? You already admitted this isn't about love or regret. You're here because you need something. She inhaled deeply, hands trembling slightly. And then, with a soft, broken voice, she finally said it, the real reason for her visit. I need help, James. I'm drowning. I looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly. She had spent all these years attempting to move on. And now, when she had nowhere else to turn, she thought she could come crawling back to me. The version of me she once knew might have caved, might have offered her a hand. But that version was dead. I just hadn't buried him yet. Leaning back, I let out a long breath, her words settling heavily in the silence between us. I'm drowning. She said it like it was supposed to carry weight, to awaken some lost piece of compassion buried deep inside me. But all it did was solidify what I had already suspected. This wasn't about me. It never had been. It was always about her. I studied her, really looked at the person sitting across from me. This wasn't the woman I had once loved. That woman had been vibrant, sure of herself, magnetic in a way that pulled others in. But now, she was a shadow of that person. Drained. Broken. She wore the look of someone who had chased mirages for far too long. And yet, I felt nothing. No anger. No relief. No sense of justice. "You're drowning," I said again, my voice cool and steady. "And you expect me to be the one to pull you out?" She flinched at the cold edge in my words, but she didn't look away. That told me everything. She had braced herself for this very reaction. She had gone over this moment countless times in her head, carefully crafting the words she'd use, envisioning how I might reply. But the man she imagined she could still reach, the version of me she had clung to, no longer existed. "I'm not expecting anything," she finally said, her hands curling tighter around the coffee cup on the table. "I just needed to try." "Try what?" I asked, my tone flat. "To see if you'd save me," she murmured, "after I destroyed the only connection we had." Her throat tightened as she swallowed, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But instead, she let out a dry, hollow laugh. "I probably deserve that," she said, nodding slightly. "I know I do." She dropped her gaze, shaking her head slowly. "For so long, I convinced myself that you must still hate me, that your silence meant you didn't want to be found. But sitting here now, I get it. It's worse than that, isn't it?" I stayed silent. I didn't need to say a word. Her expression told me she already understood. I didn't hate her. I felt nothing. And that emptiness was the one thing she couldn't bear. She exhaled slowly and ran her fingers through her hair, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't come here to beg. I promise I didn't. But after everything fell apart, I kept thinking, if I could just talk to you again, maybe I could." She stopped herself, her face twisting slightly like she couldn't believe what she was saying. "Maybe you could what?" I asked, calm and unreadable. Her eyes found mine again, glistening with something hard to define. Was it sorrow? Was it hope? Maybe both. Maybe even more. "Maybe I could fix what I broke," she admitted. "Maybe I could make you see that I—" She hesitated, words catching in her throat. I watched her struggle, saying nothing. I wanted to hear what she still believed could be salvaged after all these years. "I still care about you," she finally whispered. And with that, the truth sat between us. I drew in a slow breath, dragging my fingers across my jaw. "No," I said softly but clearly. "You don't care about me. You care about what I used to be. You care about the version of me you lost, the one who would have forgiven you, the one who would have helped you pick up the pieces." She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. "That version of me died the moment I walked out that door," I continued. "You can't grieve someone you destroyed. And you definitely can't ask a ghost to come back and rescue you." She gasped, a slight hitch in her breath giving her away. That was it, the moment she finally understood. Her fingers clutched the edge of the table like she needed something to hold her together, as her eyes darted away from mine. I pushed my chair back, just a little. "I don't know what you expected to find here," I said, my voice softening. "But whoever you were hoping for, I'm not him. And you're not the woman I used to love." She winced at that. Maybe because it was the first time I'd acknowledged I once loved her. Or maybe because she knew it was the last time I ever would. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our past pressing down like a heavy fog. Then she spoke, almost too softly to hear. "So, this is it." I held her gaze. "This ended years ago. You were just the last one to realize it." She drew in a shaky breath and nodded slowly. And right then, I knew she finally saw the truth. This wasn't just the conclusion of our story. It was the collapse of the fantasy she had refused to let go. I stood, pulled a few bills from my wallet, and placed them on the table more out of habit than necessity. Then, without another glance, I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one haunted by what used to be. That burden belonged to her now. As I stepped out into the night, the cool air brushed against my skin. The remnants of our conversation lingered, pressing gently against my chest, but it wasn't the kind of pressure that dragged me under anymore. It felt like the calm after a long storm, quiet, still, final. My footsteps echoed along the pavement as I walked down the empty street. I thought about all the years I'd spent running, ducking away from memories, convincing myself that staying invisible meant staying safe. But I had never needed to run. The past couldn't chase me. It only held power if I gave it permission. And tonight, I had finally let go. No more anger. Not toward her. Not toward what happened. The bitterness, the aching sense of loss, all of it had dissolved. In its place, there was only stillness. Peace. I reached my car and paused for a moment before climbing in. I drew in a steady breath, allowing the air to anchor me in the here and now. For far too long, I had drifted through life like a shadow, untethered, aimless, with no sense of belonging. But that chapter had finally closed. I was no longer bound, no longer held by her, or by the part of me that once clung to her. I was truly free to embrace life, not merely to pass through it. Merging onto the highway, I gave the rearview mirror a final glance. The diner still stood there, faintly glowing under the night sky. But its presence no longer stirred anything in me. She, the woman still sitting inside, was no longer my burden to carry. My journey wasn't concluding with her, it was just beginning. And this time around, I wasn't escaping something behind me, I was moving forward, towards something new.